you guys signed a deal with the devil with UK Defense Journal, right? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Osint Bunker podcast in collaboration with the UK Defense Journal. Joining me is Jordan from Intel Air and Sea, John from Defense Geek, and Tom from Sierra Alpha. And this week we're going to have a few things we're going to talk about, but we're mainly going to focus on the events from the past couple of weeks from the Middle East. We have a few topics we wanted to get into, specifically regarding tensions that have arisen, certain Iranian actions against U.S. forces, Israeli forces, and the Saudis in the region. And to kick that off, I think we'll start talking about an event I briefly addressed last week in the weekly update. But the rocket attack on the U.S. forces and NATO forces at Erbil Air Base. So, who wanted to kick us off on that one?
Yep, sure. I don't mind. So, Erbil attack was actually quite a while ago in reference to what we're talking about this week, 15th of February, and then as you say, it was something in which you touched on last week. Um, it wasn't really your bog standard militia attack, was it? It was 14 107 millimeter rockets were launched from an area south of Erbil near the border with Kirkuk, and unfortunately, three of them struck the airport, which hosts US and coalition forces. The attack resulted in five contractors being injured, one United States serviceman, and two Iraqi civilians. And unfortunately, the attack resulted in one, I believe it was a US led coalition contractor, a Filipino firefighter, I believe, and one civilian died of their injury. Um, Obviously, there were circulating. It was quite a publicized assault. I think we'll attach. That's all right in the description of the video. We'll put the rocket impact, the Mercedes dealership, were quite, I wouldn't say graphic, but quite vivid. Yeah,
Yeah, I would definitely say that. It obviously was. It wasn't a small attack. And it wasn't also that accurate, actually. When you get down to the brass tacks, it more affected civilian targets than anyone on the airbase.
And I think it was to an extent it was for the militias to see how far they are going to be able to push the United States before getting some form of response from them, testing a new administration, saying, right, okay, this is how far we can go without getting a response. Now let's see what will cause something.
Yeah, and this is what we're gonna do. See what you're gonna do to respond.
and the fact that it was 14 rockets. I mean, usually when we discuss militia rocket attacks, we're talking about two, three, maybe four, five at a stretch. This one's 14. For us to be discussing quite an for what we've seen in the past. I think the attack really, as John pointed out there, how far was the US willing to go before they respond?
Yeah, and looking at it from sort of the perspective of the US in the situation, you always have to look at what level of damage was done both to civilian targets and to military targets. And I think they were obviously trying to test the new administration. That was a big one. And trying to see what the response would be to an attack like that.
Yeah, and it's important to note that actually it wasn't just the Americans that were targeted. Ironically, the Chinese consulate was also hit
Oh
by a
yeah,
single
so
rocket.
it seemed to get
Yeah,
its outside wall got smashed.
yeah, which it took a chunk off a concrete wall on the perimeter and landed in the basically the back garden of the Chinese consulate.
Yeah, and based on the Iranian backing or the Chinese backing of Iran, I'm sure the Chinese government was not very happy with that outcome. Which I guess when it comes down to it, obviously there are always unintended consequences in foreign policy, especially when backing groups like Iranian backed Iraqi militias, and there's no way to get an exact outcome that you want from them.
yeah, it's quite, at the end of the day, what we've seen, it's quite a random, it's almost a random process. Because it's not precision munitions we're looking. It's a more, I know it sounds comical, but it's a light the fuse and the hope that it gets to its target. And unfortunately, around 75%, 80% of the time, they don't. They affect the infrastructure, cars, buildings, car dealerships, even foreign consulates, as we've seen.
Yeah, and that always you always see the general response from that being both from the Iraqi government because they have to handle, of course, the civilian impacts, even if they aren't directly stationed on the base, because again they are the government there, and also you have to see what the regional Kurdish government is doing, and obviously they are not friendly. Or not the friendliest to the Iraqi government and the way they've been managing a lot of the events happening more down south. Um, and so you sort of have to rely on what their response is going to be as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that leads us quite nicely on to actually how the US did respond to the attack, which were, I believe, total of 7 joint direct attack munitions, which is JDAMs, were launched from 2 F-15 Eagles and struck a compound in northern Syria, which was reportedly or confirmed to have been operated by Iraqi Hezbollah. The attack resulted in, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was a single casualty.
I believe there was more than one casualty. We aren't exactly sure of the casualty count as of right now, just because information is sort of sparse coming from the groups that were hit, which were Hezbollah affiliated groups operating out of the Syrian border town of Al Gamal, which is where they were hit. They have only directly confirmed, as of time of recording, one death. Um,
Yeah.
and if any additional come out, I'll obviously add that in as a footnote. Um,
Yeah, and it's worth noting that obviously local sources are reporting that upwards of 17 were killed and not one.
yeah, we don't really know right now, which is really a side effect of information in that region. The Syrian-Iraqi border region is still plagued by ISIS attacks, and it's lawless isn't exactly the most accurate term because there is a modicum of several governments controlling that area, and then also U.S. influence in that region. Um, but it definitely isn't the most easy region to get information out of. And obviously, militia groups thrive there, as well as ISIS still has a presence in the area, as I said earlier. Which again, the U.S. striking that area is definitely a development in not the strike itself, because the U.S. has struck, of course, ISIS targets there and other ISIS affiliated groups inside of Syria in that general region. Um, but this is the one of the first few times we've actually targeted an Iranian affiliated militia like Hezbollah or Kataib Hezbollah inside Syria in direct response to an attack that a similar militia made inside of Iraq.
Yeah, and it's worth noting as well that the Washington Post reported that, I believe it was Post anyway, reported that President Biden actually authorized a strike on not one but 2 targets. However, called off the strike on a second target as there was a risk that civilians were at risk.
Yes, and depending on how much that actually ends up being propaganda, which it might be. I don't know at this point. Um, of course, every presidential administration likes putting their best face forward, and if it looks better on paper that they declined to strike because there were a bunch of women and children at the target, I would obviously expect them to publicize that. Um, but I believe this also happened during the Trump administration as well, during one of his early strikes that he ended up calling off a strike because of the presence of civilians. And so, of course, this isn't exactly an unusual circumstance to see from coming out of the Oval Office.
Mm. And it's interesting as well to note, while we're on the topic, the response from America was not exactly immediate. We had the statement issued by the State Department, came about 12 to 24 hours after the attack on the base, and then the actual airstrikes didn't occur until near enough a week later.
It was a few days later, but
It
there
was
definitely
10 days later.
there definitely
was
was a delay between the actual attack and the response airstrikes.
Yeah, so the gap between the attack and the airstrikes was 10 days. 10 days was that, which is actually, that's quite a long time considering.
Yes, but the U.S. did say that the airstrikes were in response to the attacks on U.S. forces in Erbil and civilian targets as well.
Yeah.
So this wasn't an unrelated event that we're of course ascribing relation to. This is something that the U.S. did say was in direct relation.
Yeah.
And then the material of attack, of course, no cruise missiles, nothing fancy, just JDAM strikes, which are fairly standard for the region. Just with the anti-ISIS efforts that have been going on, that is the munition of choice. That and hellfires. So it was very interesting to see a strike like that.
Yeah, it certainly was. And obviously the first time that we've seen the Biden administration take action against threats in Iraq and Syria, which, to be honest, is reassuring. I'm going to say it's reassuring because it says quite a lot that it didn't take a mass event for the US to respond, and that they are willing to go to defend its assets, itself, its allies, without.
Yeah. Additionally, this was a statement strike.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
the group that was hit obviously was not the same group or the same cell that conducted the attack. This was more of a statement, of course, against Iran, because these are both Iranian-backed groups. They are both very closely related with Iran. The group that was struck does have very significant political um, influence in Iraq. They run for Iraqi government positions. They recruited a heck of a lot of people to fight in Syria against ISIS. I'll post the name of the group. I'm not going to attempt it because, as I said last week, I'm impossible at enunciating any of these names. And it would almost be disrespectful for me to try. But they are effectively a Hezbollah cutout group. And that is definitely reflected in the strikes, that this was more targeting Iran than the exact group that conducted the strike itself.
So, moving on, Osint, you wanted to discuss the presence of rivet joints in the area.
Yes, constant phoenixes actually. Our old but effective WC-135 Ws that we actually sent to the region back on. Let me just double check the date here. The 26th of February. Took off out of the United States, flew across the Atlantic, did a refueling stop over the UK, and then went down through the Mediterranean and into what we believe was either Qatar or the UAE. That's where we believe it's operating out of. There's also a chance it's operating out of Kuwait, um, based on an earlier it pinged a few times at low level over Kuwait, which leads us to think it probably is operating out of there for the moment. That was on March 1st. It pinged a few times taking off out of Kuwait. It'll be up on the screen there. But definitely an interesting development, as the WC-135, its main role is to basically collect air samples, process them and detect potentially radioactive isotopes that would come out of various nuclear tests or nuclear explosions. Um, it's a multi-use aircraft in those cases. We've used it for North Korean nuclear tests. Even though they're below ground, it still emits some radioactive material into the atmosphere. They were worked very hard during the nuclear test ban times, which they basically just existed to make sure that the Soviet Union was not actually doing above ground tests. Um, its potential existence in the region is certainly interesting on a strategical scale or strategic scale. What was that word? Um, because it definitely either insinuates that the Iranians may try something of a nuclear variety, whether that be a test or potentially they have emitted some nuclear material into the atmosphere. Um, or it is training, and the US feels like in the near future or the mid to near future, the Iranians may try a nuclear test, which obviously is the status quo right now. We do expect the Iranians, unless there is some sort of comprehensive agreement reached, to test a nuclear weapon. Um, and at that point, really, I just have to hand it off to you guys, just to get an idea of what you think on this, because I obviously have some thoughts that I have tweeted about, but I won't even say on the podcast because they are, tinfoil on head, slightly crazy. But I'll just hand it off to you guys.
I just think for what my opinion on the matter is that it could be seen as just it's just a deterrent factor to it, that visibly having the presence of something that can detect these type of activities in the region could be enough to say, well, if you do fancy trying anything, we're gonna find out and we're gonna have proof of it, so don't do it in the first place.
And I did gloss over that. That would be another aspect of the training, would be,
It,
just showing Iran, we have this in the region. If you test, we will know.
I think the deterrent factor as well, and obviously, I'm not too familiar with the actual workings of the particular aircraft. This is not my area of knowledge, but could it not have something to do with just monitoring their normal nuclear facilities?
Normal nuclear facilities would not be, if they are admitting things that could be detected by this aircraft, it would be
Something's gone
it would
seriously wrong.
yeah, it would be very, very, very wrong, because that
Right,
means you would have I mean, you would basically be looking at like a 3 Mile Island level of
right.
nuclear emissions. So it would, obviously, if they were emitting something that could be detected by this aircraft, it would not be good.
And
Yeah.
like you said, obviously the aircraft's been used quite keenly throughout Trump's administration with dealing with North Korea. And I think it's fair to say that the amount of activity from the aircraft that were deployed there has sort of tailed off a little bit in recent months. They are still occasionally flying over North Korea, but not nearly as much as they were at the height of negotiations.
One was
Prior to that.
flying over the Yellow Sea earlier in the
Yeah.
week as
There
well.
was an RC-135 that's been doing fairly regular excursions into the Yellow Sea over the past few months, actually. It hasn't even been that unusual at this point to see it up and in that area. So obviously that may be another deterrent factor from the new administration.
Yeah, and obviously it shows because with North Korea, they are keeping up those patrols. But the fact that we're now seeing Iran getting that sort of almost same level of attention should kind of indicate really just how serious the state of Iran's nuclear weapons program has gotten. That they are at the point where the US administration recognizes that, like North Korea, we could very well see nuclear tests in the very near future, as you said.
Yeah, and the aircraft has been in the region before, monitoring, of course, Iranian activity, and also as a training tool, and of course, again, as a deterrence, just telling Iran, if you attempt to test anything, we will immediately know about it. Um, So there definitely is that element to the aircraft being in the region. And is anyone gonna touch on my pants on head conspiracy theories about this, or are we just gonna skip ahead?
I think move on to the next topic.
Okay, conspiracy tweet linked below. So next up, we were gonna talk about the Russian reveal that they had utilized an Iskander missile to strike a Syrian hospital back in 2016, and they released a fairly high quality video of a hospital being hit and an attack which had been blamed on other groups.
It honestly baffles me why they would just on a human level. It baffles me. There is no strategic game or moral game behind it. It's like almost bragging, moving it around, saying, yay, we bombed a hospital. Check this.
I mean, the New
I
York
really,
Times did a fairly comprehensive piece, basically showing that the Russians had been targeting hospitals from about 2017 with conventional munitions from jets. And they did a lot of Osint work, geolocation. Have to honestly give the New York Times a massive hand for the extreme quality of work they put out in the Osint field. Um, Honestly, they're one of the best professionally publicly publishing sources that you can get. They publish infrequently, but when they do, it's usually on something big. And to this effect, they did reveal that the Russians had been bombing hospitals. Um, but this Iskander strike was from February of 2016. Um, the New York Times had only established that the Russians were striking hospitals from 2017 till now, and this is definitely an establishment that they had started that trend far earlier than we thought.
you're right. And if I'm completely honest, the word sickening comes to mind, and that
Yeah, and I think that honestly the most baffling part from all of this was the fact that the video was initially supposed to be extolling the virtues and the effectiveness of the Iskander missile, and it just happened to include a video of them striking a civilian hospital, which is just it's so confusing. Either they didn't check the video, which is just a failure in a lot of different ways, or the second option is that they knew what the video was and they still decided to release it and they just don't care.
I think the second
yeah,
option is probably the most likely option. Like they don't care because no one's done anything about it before, and to be honest, no one seems to be gonna do anything about it since.
Yeah, and again, I mean, there of course it comes back to the original question of why are the Russians in Syria? What are they doing in Syria? And it almost seems at this point like Syria is Russia's play war ground where they basically just get to test out weapons systems and spend a bit of money to keep Assad in power and just it's both a geopolitical move in the region, obviously, to have a foothold in the Middle East, but it also definitely seems to be just a testing ground for their weapons at some level. I mean, they sent an Su-57 there just a couple of years ago, actually 2 years before it entered service. So it's just it's very interesting, and it's almost confusing to a point of just how brazen they are in their flagrant violations of human rights.
absolutely nothing will happen because proof in chaotic war zones such as Syria is so hard to come by. Sorts of things, information is so twisted and warped that they feel that they can get away with it.
Yeah, but as we've seen very very clearly, pictures don't lie, and these pictures are very clear in what they show. And I don't think people can claim manipulation of them because I mean they were released by the Russian government. I mean it came directly from the Russians.
Yeah, and that's exactly it's undeniable.
Yeah, it's something that's been geolocated at this point, and there's only so much hand wringing we can do, obviously, and there's only so much we can say because the international community obviously seems hell bent on doing nothing, and it seems like the entire world is sort of annoying these flagrant violations.
Mm. It's worth noting as well because obviously back in 2016, 2017, there was so many different incidents in Syria where the UN got involved and issued statements and condemning things, and then you had the US, the UK, and France carrying out joint strikes in response to a number of different things. And yet now, all these years later, obviously this revelation from the Russians, and there's been near enough nothing has been said, I think it's fair to say, by the UN and by most of the nations who were very, very vocal a few years ago.
Yeah, and I mean this isn't, obviously this is depressing in a lot of different ways. We just haven't seen any movement on this. And if I risk becoming more depressed on this, I don't actually expect anything to happen in the near future just because Russia's position is so entrenched in Syria at this point, and Assad has pretty much effectively, apart from losing a good portion of his country, um, he still controls most of the populated regions and most of the wealthier regions, and just there's no way his government is actually going to collapse anytime soon, and I expect him to stay in power for a while, to be honest.
I think you're right. There's no realistic way of seeing him going anywhere for a long, long time. Maybe when he passes away, there'll be arguments over successors and people fighting and kicking off then. But for the foreseeable future, there's nothing going to happen to him.
Yeah, and if he dies, if the Russians leave and then he dies, I do expect there to be a power vacuum. If the Russians are still there, though, um, obviously whoever becomes his successor will be appointed by the Russians, or will be anointed at least, in the way that they will have blessed them to become the next president of Syria, and it's just sort of depressing to see that, and there will be no change in the near future.
Yeah, to
It's
be
just
honest,
depressing.
yeah, that's really it, isn't it? Um, yeah, and I think we'll move on to the next topic, shall we?
Yeah, that sort of puts a not great note moving into the next topic. Um,
Yeah, which yeah,
yeah, sorry about that one. But you
has
know,
to be done. Has to be. People have to be made.
yeah, we're obviously we've passed the point of being pissed, and we're just depressed.
The
So
next
moving on to the next topic, MV Helios Ray, an Israeli car carrier, was hit by what we first thought was an unknown explosion back on February 25th. It was widely publicized about 18 hours after it happened, once mainstream news sources actually started actually really getting attention to it. Once everyone realized it wasn't an unexplained explosion, but a purposeful explosion. So if you guys want to talk to that.
Well, when it first got happened, it was the Israeli media report. After obviously the incident, if it came out, it was a few days afterwards. The Israeli media reported originally it being missiles that had been hit by, but if you looked at the ship and where the actual explosion occurred, it was basically right on the waterline of the vessel.
Yeah, I had come up with a schematic from a, albeit smaller but similar ship in its layout, design, decks. And if you saw, it was clear in the pictures of the missile impact that it was Deck 4 that had been hit. And if you look at designs from similar ships, Deck 4 would be right around the waterline of the ship, which indicated it could have been something that would have been planted by a small craft. While it was transiting through the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranians are known for utilizing small craft to plant limpet mines and cause general issues.
Yeah,
And
and
yeah,
Israeli media was quite quick to point fingers towards Iran. Um, like you say, initially the accusation was that it was a couple of anti-ship missiles that had been fired. Then we had the possibility of limpet mines, or just normal sea mines. And I think once the Israeli Defense Forces finally made a statement about what was going on and said that there would be further investigation, I think the media kind of calmed down a little bit, and we haven't. I certainly haven't seen an awful lot of an explanation further into it since.
There's
Yeah,
been very little said about it since. I think you're probably going to hear more when the Israeli government come to an official conclusion and publish that. You'll probably hear some more then.
yeah. We thought initially that the Israeli government had come to a very quick conclusion. They were directly blaming Iran. Netanyahu issued a statement that was very strong. The attack on Helios Ray is indeed an action by Iran. It is clear it is Israel's greatest enemy, and we will be beating it in the whole region. The Iranians will not have nuclear weapons, with or without an agreement. I also said this to my friend Biden. So we all thought right after the attack. That the Israelis were being very concrete in their assessment over what it was, and then it sort of just trailed off. There wasn't exactly much concrete response from what we could see publicly.
Yeah, agreed. And I think when it comes to this, we have to assume quite a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and it was indicated by the fact that that Biden and Netanyahu, obviously from Netanyahu's statement, it indicated that they had spoken about it, um, which certainly was interesting.
Yeah, so as I was saying, at the end of the day, if it was anti have known about it, it would have done a hell of a lot more damage than was.
Oh, obviously. And we had all thought that initially was the assessment of anti-ship missile was probably a bit incorrect because most anti-ship missiles would have torn a hole through one side of the ship and out the other. Um, it would have been very hard for the ship to have sustained that little damage. I mean, there are fairly clear images and videos of warships struck by fairly small anti-ship missiles of literally the missile going through one side and out the other, and I'm very sure that would not have been hard with a car carrier.
Yeah, because it's quite a hollow object, really, isn't it? Not like a bulk carrier where you've got metal upon layers of metal
No,
surrounding
this would have
the
gone.
internal pieces. Yeah, it would have
Yeah.
gone straight through, no doubt.
And the impact size of the hole was tiny. And I mean, anti-ship missiles are made to take down ships. Limpet mines incorrectly placed are more likely to do small amounts of damage than actually take down a ship. A limpet mine correctly deployed can take down a ship, obviously, because it's much harder for an anti-ship missile to hit below the waterline than a limpet mine to be placed below the waterline, which is an indication, obviously, the Iranians, if they were moving quickly at night, they weren't going to deploy divers to deploy an anti-ship missile below or a limpet mine below the waterline. They just stuck it to the side of the ship and ran. Um,
Which
and
we've seen before.
we have seen that before with other ships, and um, generally it is hard for a ship of that size. You can see the visibility fairly clearly when looking at the ship. The visibility isn't great. Um, and so they definitely have issues, especially at night, seeing smaller vessels. And a small vessel, it wouldn't be that easy for it to show up on something like navigation surface search radar. That commercial varieties, it might have been picked up by something like a military grade, your standard spy surface search radars on the U.S. Aegis platform. But it wouldn't have been picked up by just a marine grade radar.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that over the next few days, I'd imagine.
Yeah, once the Israeli assessment comes out, of course, once the crew is interviewed, we'll have a better idea of what happened.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. It'll be interesting to know. Obviously, yeah, it goes without saying that we'll know what the outcome will be of that investigation, I'm sure. So I
Hopefully, we know
reckon,
what the outcome of the investigation is.
Yeah, yeah.
just because,
To be honest, I should imagine we will.
I would more say 50-50 at this point. There
Yeah.
is a chance that we could see an outcome to the investigation. But there also is a chance that the Israelis could keep it more covert, depending on what the outcome of the investigation is, of course.
So with that, Jordan, do you want to take us through the ongoing B-52 movement?
Yes, so it was once again it was yesterday and obviously today as they head back, another global power mission for the B-52s out of MENA Air Force Base to the Persian Gulf and back again. This is the second global power flight under Biden's administration, and it pretty much follows the standard procedure of what they all do. A quick jaunt over the Atlantic, and a bit of exercises and formation flights with the likes of the Saudis and the Israelis on their way. And obviously we saw a lot of them under Trump towards the end of it, especially towards the end of his presidency, as tensions went up with Iran. But obviously tensions are still there with Iran at the minute, but particularly with Biden, obviously they're sent, but it's just more message sending and just muscle flexing.
Yeah, it definitely does seem to be a fairly direct carryover from the end of the Trump presidency. I mean, probably the last year of the Trump presidency had a lot of those long-range B-52 exercises that we saw, and it seems like the Biden administration has pretty much carried them out identically to the way they were carried out under the Trump administration. Um, so that was definitely a carryover, and it sends a message. Obviously, the
It
U.S. is
it,
able
it
to project force.
It keeps the presence there, and also, I mean, it offers a diplomatic sense of it, a diplomatic element to it, as in you can go and fly formations with other countries to say, look, we're allies, we'll fly, we'll do formation flights, and we'll escort your bombers over our country.
Nothing says diplomacy like 48 Tomahawk cruise missiles. That's always a great form of diplomacy.
Did someone order some
American
freedom?
diplomacy.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Diplomacy through tomahawks. It's a great kind. Um,
yeah. Really is.
but short of the jokes, it definitely does send a message to Iran. Obviously gives the American government and allied governments in the region a position of power to negotiate from in any circumstance, and it definitely makes militia groups think twice about taking on rocket attacks and conducting various attacks in the region. Granted, that didn't work very well, as we will see in the next topic, which I think we can get into now.
I was going to say before we move on, it was really good to see with the B-52 flight today. We've actually got a photo of the Israeli F-15s escorting it, and it's worth remembering this is the first time that the B-52s have come over since Israel has been formally sort of co-joined into US Central Command operations, because that obviously occurred a couple of weeks ago, that change, and they're now fully involved in US CENTCOM.
Yeah, and that definitely gives them a better ability to operate with U.S. forces in the region. It just streamlines stuff and allows the U.S. to incorporate Israeli elements into stuff like airstrikes and, of course, escort duty. It just gives us that extra sort of power in the region, and definitely gives commanders sort of easier integration with Israeli forces. So moving on to the next topic, obviously, those deterrent factors sort of didn't exactly work precisely that well, as last week, or sorry, a few days ago, there was a rocket attack on Ain Al-Assad airbase in Iraq, a base that had earlier seen last year an Iranian ballistic missile attack, and has been fairly on and off attacked by Iranian-backed Iraqi militias for the past few years. But this was a fairly large attack. 10 indirect fire, as the OIR spokesman would like to call it.
Christ.
Oh my god.
Rockets um, hit the base. One U.S. contractor was or died from a heart attack during the attack, but it's fairly easy to say that he died from the attack. But the official line from the OIR office and from the U.S. government was that he died from a heart attack during the attack. So we just have to say that that is what the line from the government is right now. Um, it happened on March 3rd at 7:20 a.m. Iraqi time, and currently, from what we believe, the missiles that targeted the base were Iranian made, and they were 127 millimeter artillery rockets. We also have pictures of the launch vehicle, which you can see on the screen right now.
It's quite interesting that because it's it's a truck in which the bed moves up and down, and it's I must say the ingenuity behind
It's a
quite
common design
something
that we've
impressive.
actually. It's a fairly common design we've seen before. It's just a false bottom truck with of course that lifting mechanism, and you're right, it is
Yeah,
fairly ingenious and allows them to sort of position a fairly large launch vehicle um close to any US positions without the US easily detecting it.
yeah, and obviously they destroyed it in the process, but they got some shots off nevertheless.
Yeah, and it did seem like there was some damage on the base. And we're unsure right now whether or not these were more advanced missiles supplied by Iran to Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. We do know that Iran has some new generation 127 millimeter artillery rockets that um, would allow them to cause a lot of issues at a U.S. base, um, and that's something we definitely are that the local government and U.S. forces will be looking into.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, the first time that the space has been targeted, and needless to say, it won't be the last time either.
Nope, obviously not. Um, it is a large central focus for U.S. forces in the region, and it operates sort of as a, and has operated for the past 15 plus years as a central hub in the region for a lot of different operations and U.S. activities. So it's I mean obviously it's a target of attention for a lot of these groups.
I think targets, when you mention targets, every single United States related bit of infrastructure across Iraq and Syria, Saudi Arabia are currently targets.
Oh, definitely, and as we've seen. Suicide UAVs targeted at Saudi Arabia. We talked about that, or I talked about that last week. We saw that very clearly. um, and just general. We've seen a lot of Iranian action in the region over the past few weeks. The attack on MV Helios Ray with the Limpet mine, attacks by Iranian-backed militias in Yemen against Saudi Arabia, attacks by Iranian-backed militias in Iraq against U.S. forces and regional forces. It seems to honestly be an escalating focus from Iran against general targets in the region.
Yeah, completely agree. And there does seem to be a pattern of escalation at the moment. I mean, even you can take even the amount of rockets that are being fired at United States air bases, even the number increasing, and that is a sign of, unfortunately, what I believe is things to come.
Very that's very possible, to be honest. And we have seen a lot of I don't know if it's more aggressive action because the Iranians believe that they can pressure the new administration into a different tact, especially with the Biden administration's openness to potentially new peace agreements, or if it's just trying to stress the new administration into a position where the Iranians are allowed to act pretty much with impunity. Um, and so we sort of have to see how the Biden administration responds. Obviously, we've seen one retaliatory strike, which we talked about earlier, a strike against a separate group, but very much Iranian affiliated, which was definitely a message against the Iranians. Um, but we definitely, we have to see how that sort of how that comes together, I guess, between the Biden administration's foreign policy apparatus, the military apparatus, and obviously we always forget to talk about how the Iraqi government is sitting in the middle of this and how they are the ones most affected by this. And I mean, as I talked about last week, they don't really have the best say in how the Iranians and the US relate in the region, and they also have to balance both powers in a way that is extremely difficult for them, and we definitely see effects of that ongoing.
Yeah, and Iraq is in undoubtedly a very, very difficult, volatile position, as you say, because they've got two superpowers involved in their inside their borders, and Iraq is the most likely place, aside from Yemen, to be center of a geopolitical crisis, in which I believe we're seeing that at the moment. That's set to increase with the foreign policy of the United States and Iran.
Yeah, I mean the difference between Iraq and Yemen in that regards is Iraq is directly bordered by Iran and Saudi Arabia. So it is a focal point between those forces. Yemen, on the other hand, there's a bit of water in between it and Iran, which definitely makes Iranian efforts to move weapons into Yemen a bit harder. It's a lot easier for Iran to move weapons into Iraq. It's a truck across the border. It is not that difficult. Which makes Iraq way more appealing to Iranian-backed militias, especially after the events where the U.S. and the Iraqi government basically invited in Iranian weapons, Iranian commanders, Iranian-backed troops, and that was at a time when basically defeating ISIS was the main focus, and there was really no other focus at the time. And now it's basically created situations where you have a country with two very large competing powers, a lot of weapons, and a lot of opposed armed groups. And the central government, actually doesn't have control really over the US. They don't have control over Iran, and they don't have control over the armed groups. And they really try their hardest in order to create a situation where they're technically allied with the US more directly than they're allied with Iran, but at the same time Iran has a lot of influence just because of their proximity and actual power in the country. And you just get this sort of split.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, you got to feel for Iraq. Really, you have to feel for them. Um, not a situation that any country needs to be in, or nor one. And it'll be the center of geopolitical focus for years to come.
Yeah, it's honestly it's just rough for them. And I would never want to be put in that situation. I mean, it'd be like at the US if Canada and Mexico were both superpowers and both competing on US soil. It's a really hard situation for us to for the Iraqi government to go through. And I
Yeah,
definitely think that is an element that at least the US is taking into account at this point. That is an element probably of why the airstrikes were not on Iraqi soil but on Syrian soil, which is definitely a
yeah,
difference. Um, but we'll see going into the future how the U.S. sort of balances those issues.
yeah, 100%. Um, so next on the list is AS. We have the USS Eisenhower carrier strike. So Jordan, do you want to take us through some overview of that one?
Yep, so US Eisenhower carrier strike group's been operating off the coast of Morocco for about a week now, and it was first observed with its C2 Greyhounds being picked up by Osinttechnical going into Rota from the carrier strike group. They were noticed, and it's been doing a joint exercise with the Moroccan well, handshake exercise with the Moroccan Navy occurred first, and that was later followed by joint aerial exercises that had KC-135s come down from RAF Middenhall to provide support for that operation.
Yeah.
And I believe now it's not far off the Strait of Gibraltar and probably should pass through there tomorrow.
Yes, and so currently, this definitely from a broader perspective, obviously, you were just able to. One of the best ways to track carrier strike groups is onboard delivery aircraft, which of course are necessary for mail, packages, supplies, um, and they usually fly on open transponders. So if you see a C2, it usually is coming from a carrier or going to a carrier, which is definitely a great way to track the position. Um, from a broader perspective, though, sort of country on country, this definitely reflects the U.S.'s increased attention in Northern Africa, and in Africa as a whole. As China continues to exert some influence in the country, the U.S. is trying to sort of re-enter into long-held alliances. Morocco and the U.S. have been very close allies for a while now. And we'll definitely see how that sort of evolves into the future as Iraq becomes more of a focus or as Africa becomes more of a global focus. Um,
Well, like the US can, if the US wants to get involved in Africa, it can do things that China can't. Is, for example, right, no nation can compete with China's infrastructure building projects in the particular way that it's done through the Belt and Road. There's really no competition, but the US has has the military assets that really no one can provide, and it can outcompete China in terms of security for those countries.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen that in the practical U.S. Boots on the ground for special forces operators. If a country is having, a terrorist issue or a general insurgency issue, you can pretty much expect if they're even slightly allied with the U.S. to see U.S. special forces on the ground dealing with that insurgency issue. It's just a way for the U.S. to exert practical, immediate help for these nations, and it's a combination of that soft power and hard power where it's military assistance in the most direct way possible.
Hmm.
And seeing that evolve into the future in Africa will definitely be interesting. I mean, we've already seen how many, C-146s in and out of Kenya and in and out of Somalia and operating all over Africa at this point. Definitely gives you an indication of how much special operations activity is going on in the region. Um, and then on top of that, the U.S. Carrier Strike Group, we're not going to say has been trailed by a Russian Kilo class, but there is a Russian Kilo class transiting into the Mediterranean at around the same time,
The
and it has
the
been
Rostov on Don is the particular Kilo class sub.
yes, and it has been hounded for the past few days by US P8 Poseidons. Honestly, it's been how many sorties at this point? Eight,
I don't know.
10.
We're looking probably, I would say, 7 or 8 now.
Yeah, it's a lot of sorties, and they've just been multiple P8s following this sub.
Well,
Um,
as we speak right now, there is one literally following it on the exit of the Strait of Gibraltar right now tonight.
Yeah, it's just honestly they are making sure the sub didn't try to make a dash to the south, to try to get near the U.S. carrier strike group, which does bring up an issue of the U.S. carrier infrastructure actually doesn't have a fixed wing anti submarine warfare aircraft after we retired our S3s, so they're sort of reliant on fixed wing P3 and P8 assets in order to sort of extend out the carrier's actual sphere of ASW influence, which is super important for ASW exercises and for ASW operations. Is distance is key. Keeping a sub far away is the best way to keep it from attacking the group.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Um, I think, and with that, I believe that might be our list covered, chaps.
Yes, I think it is indeed.
Yeah, obviously this week was big news wise, and we missed out, and we didn't talk about some stuff, from some other regions. If that evolves, obviously we're always tweeting about it. We're trying to follow everything. But the Middle East has definitely taken a lot of our attention from the past week and change. Um, and we'll see how that evolves into the near future. But we hope next week to be back focusing on more smaller things that have definitely passed people by, and sort of discover the relationship with other events, and give a better overarching view of the situation.
Yeah, definitely. And when you say next week, you mean the next
Well,
couple of weeks?
next week in my news update, I'm definitely gonna do some
Yes, of
focus,
course. Yeah, my
and
bad.
then of course 2 weeks from now, when we do our full next podcast, we will be talking
Yeah.
more about correction. Hopefully, if everything stays quiet in the Middle East, which by saying that I've probably completely jinxed
Which
it.
it literally won't now you said that, because you said that last week.
Yeah. While we've been talking, there's been a few new updates, which I'll get to momentarily.
Oh, you've got to be joking.
I
Okay,
wish
for
I was.
anyone questioning, it is currently 8:25 p.m. GMT. So for if there's something big happening, hopefully that gives people some idea of when we're recording this.
Yeah, and with that, I will bring you just a couple of little news bits from the last 2 weeks since we last had this podcast. There's been an explosion at a military base in Equatorial Guinea this afternoon. At least 20 people have been killed, and there's some pretty shocking scenes at the moment of trucks leaving the base, taking children and civilians to hospital. Um, no word yet as to exactly what's caused those explosions, but obviously the death toll is quite significant and is expected to rise in the coming hours. Saudi Arabia have just informed the world that an oil tank yard in the port of Ras Tanura on the Persian Gulf was targeted today by an unmanned aerial vehicle. Yemen's Houthis are believed to have been behind this attack too, which has just been the latest in a long string of Houthi attacks against Saudi Arabia this week. As mentioned earlier, we had the B-52 flight across to Iraq today. Hopefully, Technical will throw a photo up on the podcast for you.
Yep,
Of
we'll
the
have images of the flight path and of the aircraft themselves.
Of the Israeli F-15s escorting the bombers over Israel. A French politician and billionaire who formerly was a pilot in the French Air Force, Mr. Olivier Dassault, has died today in a helicopter crash. We've got no further info on that yet, as it only happened a few hours ago.
And the name Dassault, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe its brother is associated with the aircraft Dassault.
Yeah, the family have ties to Dassault Aviation Company, which is obviously one of France's biggest military aviation companies, responsible for the Mirage and the Rafale. So that will be a story that we will be following in the next couple of days. We've had rumours today leaked in British newspapers about the upcoming UK defence review. Obviously, this defence review is supposed to have this review was supposed to have been released last year. It's now due out in a little over a week's time. We're not going to go into huge detail here about exactly what has been said, but obviously,
no, let's please not. It's just
it
depressing.
is all speculation. But it doesn't look good. Is the long and the short of it. And I will, if you haven't already read up about it, go check out Henry Jones on Twitter. He did a thread about it earlier today, which, needless to say, left a lot of us feeling very.
I'm
very
sure
depressed.
we'll link that in the description of the.
As always, links will be down in the description.
Beyond that, we've had obviously the Pope's visit to Iraq, and it was quite fascinating to see Iraqi special forces tasked with protecting him wearing little crosses on their uniforms. Not something that you would perhaps see were the roles reversed, but there you go. Apaches have gone on board HMS Queen Elizabeth for the first time today as well, as part of preparations for the upcoming Carrier Strike Group 21 deployment.
Yes.
And that,
Additionally, I just wanted to comment. Just coming across my feed at least, it seems that the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier is sortying from Norfolk right now. Not exactly sure if it's sortying with a CSG, um, or it seems to have a bare top right now, but I'm not exactly sure what it is doing. The Italian aircraft carrier Cavour is currently going through certification flights with the F-35 off the coast of Virginia. It's been very interesting to see. U.S. fighters have been simulating attacks, and U.S. tankers have been operating with F-35s. They aren't Italian F-35s, of course. They are American F-35s, but they are working on certification with the Italian aircraft carrier.
and the one last bit of news from the last week, the UK Ministry of Defence has confirmed that a sergeant of the Welsh Guards was tragically shot dead during a live fire night exercise on the Castle Martin Ranges in Wales. That occurred at about 3:45 a.m. on Thursday of this week. Sergeant's next of kin have been informed, and I believe we're still waiting on details and a name to be released, but an investigation is now underway.
All right, and that seems to be everything for this week. Obviously, I will be back next week. Everyone else will be back in 2 weeks' time. Hopefully, nothing goes on, but I jinxed it 10 minutes ago, so expect something huge to happen in the Middle East because, every time I say nothing's going to happen, something huge ends up happening. But thank you so much for joining. We're going to have a few links at the end of the video. Of course, for additional stuff, links for anything we mentioned will be down in the description with timestamps. And thank you so much for listening. We will be back. I will be back next week. Everyone will be back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.
See you later.